So let's welcome the first panelist, Professor Everett Thompson. He's teaching at the University of British Columbia with a research focus on Buddhist and Western philosophy of mind and cognitive science. Let's welcome Professor Thompson.
Use this one. 大家好。我一点紧张，那么多人。I always get a little nervous in very big lecture halls with lots of very impressive people. My title is Enactive Intuition and the Blind Spot of AI. And my starting point is what the Japanese Zen Buddhist philosopher Nishida Kitaro called enactive intuition. Shinwei de Zhiguan. Intuition means direct experience, awareness before or beyond the split between subject and object. In his early works, Nishida used the term pure experience, which he took from William James. Pure experience is the basic form of experience before or beyond the subject-object dichotomy. Enactive means characterized by action in contrast to passive reception. Enactive intuition, I just want to position this right. Enactive intuition means characterized by action in contrast to passive reception. Enactive intuition, a term from Nishida's later writings, means that pure experience is not passive or disembodied. To be aware is already to act through our bodies and to bring forth a world while being formed by the world. Body and world for Nishida always have historical being, so pure experience, enactive intuition, arises within our concrete historical situation, both forming and formed by it. As Nishida wrote in 1936, that which I called the world of direct or pure experience, I have now come to think of as the world of historical reality. The world of enactive intuition, the world of poesis, is none other than the world of pure experience. Poesis is the Greek word for something made or produced, from which we get the English word poetry. Art exemplifies enactive intuition because intuition entails action, and action entails intuition in artistic creation. Nishida argues that the same is true of science. Scientific observation and experimentation require that we intuit and act with and through our bodies and special instruments in a community of investigators. Enactive intuition is the wellspring, the source of science. Our modern scientific worldview, however, is based on forgetting that enactive intuition is the source of science. By modern scientific worldview, I mean the philosophical perspective that got attached to modern science, beginning in the 17th century and continuing down to our time. That philosophical perspective comes from European natural philosophy. It takes the mathematizable properties of physics to be what is fundamentally real, not the world as we experience it. We see color, for example, and experience sensations of hot and cold, but electromagnetic radiation and the average kinetic energy of molecules and atoms are said to be what is fundamentally real, not what we experience. Even though color has obvious biological and psychological value, and we could not have constructed thermometry, the science of temperature or the measurement of temperature, and thermodynamics without relying on our sensations of hot and cold, our bodily experience. Similarly, we experience duration and the passage of time with its ever-renewing now, but time as measured by a clock is said to be physically real time. According to this way of thinking, which Alfred North Whitehead called the bifurcation of nature, nature at an instant is more fundamental than nature as process, magnitudes are more fundamental than qualities, computation is more fundamental than meaning, and information is more fundamental than mind. This philosophical worldview is built on a deep amnesia forgetting of experience, a forgetting of enactive intuition. because the abstract models and constructs of mathematical science actually presuppose and depend on our lived experience for their meaning and intelligibility. For example, a physical clock measures a succession of moments, but only experiencing duration allows us to recognize this as a succession. Clocks don't measure time, we do. Without our enactive intuition of time, clock time, as physics defines it, is unintelligible. The idea that lived experience is a necessary condition of science is the central thesis of my recent book, The Blind Spot: Why Science Cannot Ignore Human Experience, co-written with the physicists Adam Frank and Marcelo Gleiser. We argue that at the heart of science lies something we do not see that makes science possible, just as the blind spot lies at the heart of our visual field and makes seeing possible. In the visual blind spot sits the optic nerve. In the scientific blind spot sits direct experience. Nowhere is the scientific blind spot more present than in AI. Thinking that the mind is essentially a computer has given rise to intractable problems, visible especially in current AI. The problems center on meaning and understanding, particularly on how we realize relevance. Relevance realization, and this has a double meaning in English, because in English, to realize means to understand, but it also means to embody. So relevance realization, in that dual sense, is the process of being able to decide what matters in any given situation. Consider taking notes during a lecture. You have to zero in on what is relevant and know how to ignore what is irrelevant. You need to be able to follow a train of thought and extract its meaning, its main ideas, while making connections to other things you know. If you ask questions, whether to get more detail, clear up a misunderstanding, or bring out and explore presuppositions or implications of what is being said, you also have to be able to discern what is relevant. Furthermore, this whole activity is shaped and guided by norms, by values, by standards of how you should think and speak, social standards of good behavior, common sense standards of good judgment. All of this is crucial for relevance realization. The standard computational approach to relevance realization is to try to turn it into another form of problem solving, one that relies on heuristics, that is, makeshift and imperfect solutions instead of algorithms, step-by-step procedures guaranteed to give you a certain result. But this approach to relevance realization just kicks the can down the road, because you already need to have distinguished relevance in order to know which heuristics are the relevant ones to apply in any given situation. This vicious circle suggests that relevance realization cannot be reduced to an algorithmic or heuristic process, or to put it another way, that relevance realization is not completely formalizable. Instead, relevance realization is built on having or being a body and experiencing the world through perception and action. In other words, relevance realization requires enactive intuition, which is not likely to be completely formalizable in a computational framework. Nevertheless, projecting a capacity for intuition onto AI is widespread in the hype surrounding AI technology. Consider AlphaGo, the deep learning Go playing program that defeated world champion Lee Sedol in 2016, or its more powerful successor program, AlphaGo Zero. Commentators claimed that these programs replicated or captured human intuition about Go positions and moves. Intuition, according to this perspective, is just a matter of computation. What Go players, based on their subjective experience, call intuition is really just neural computations, which are subjectively inscrutable to the players themselves. The experience of intuition is an after-the-fact side effect, a subjective epiphenomenon of brain computations, according to this way of thinking. We've now arrived at the blind spot. AlphaGo does not replicate or capture human intuition, and it does not realize relevance because it knows nothing about Go as a game. AlphaGo excels at detecting patterns that we know are Go board positions. but it does not know that its data structures represent Go positions and moves. AlphaGo does not know that it is evaluating Go moves. Indeed, it does not know that it is playing Go at all. We understand its behavior as being about Go, a game that exists in the world outside its data structures. But AlphaGo has no knowledge of there being an outside world, let alone one with games. So AlphaGo does not replicate or capture intuition. Rather, its pattern detection performance, as interpreted by us from the outside, models aspects of human Go playing intuition by simulating them. AlphaGo and deep learning neural networks in general provide no evidence that intuition is epiphenomenal. On the contrary, the experience of intuition is how we should expect a highly skilled embodied agent's perception to be organized so as to be efficacious for action in the real world. Suppose we were to create an artificial embodied expert Go player that did know that it was playing Go. To have this kind of knowledge, it would have to know and understand numerous things about the world, including understanding itself as an agent in the Go playing community and the world at large. We should expect that its deep inner workings would be subjectively inscrutable to it, precisely because it would be oriented to the world and not to its own internal workings. When you play Go, you're not aware of your neuron firings, you're aware of the positions and moves and the other player. We should expect that it would perceive Go positions by intuiting them as having good shapes, and that its intuitive mode of perception would be a causally efficacious way for its cognition to be organized in relation to the world. Without being organized for intuition, it would not be able to realize relevance, not just in the well-defined micro-domain of Go, but also in the ill-defined world at large. Despite AI hype, no AI system comes close to realizing relevance, and no historical or current AI approaches come anywhere near being able to create systems that understand meaning, have general intelligence, or manifest even minimal common sense. Consider so-called face recognition systems. Despite the name, they do not, properly speaking, recognize faces. Instead, they learn mappings between digital images of faces and token labels of the people who have those faces. We humans know that these token labels are proper names. We know to whom the labels refer, and we recognize that the image is a picture of the person they name, but the AI has no such knowledge. Similarly, large language models consist of complex statistical models of how the token labels in their huge amounts of training data correlate, but no amount of statistical prediction, no matter how robust and how large the data set, is sufficient for causal knowledge of how the outside world works. For example, imagine seeing a sequence of lights on the wall, green, yellow, red, green, yellow, red. Given these observations, you may successfully predict the next color, green. The capacity to make this prediction, a form of statistical inference, is distinct from the capacity to understand what generates the sequence or what would change it. For example, knowing that it's made by the traffic light outside, without which it would not occur. Evidence from developmental psychology suggests that the human capacity to appreciate this type of dependency, to have a generative concept of cause, develops from our experience of our own and others' goal-directed actions. Human learning occurs through active participation in world affairs by making the differences that we need and want to make in our lives as social biological beings. Our causal knowledge comes from being able to perceive and act, and from understanding the contingencies between actions and outcomes. LLMs, large language models, have no such abilities. They have no conceptual understanding of the outside world because they have no real-world experience. Just as AlphaGo does not know anything about Go as a game, and facial image detection systems have no knowledge that their data structures pertain to images of faces, let alone people, real people who exist in the world, ChatGPT has no knowledge of how the world works. In these respects, LLMs and face detection systems are not that much different from a map or an abacus. The map doesn't know the way home, and the abacus is not clever at arithmetic. It takes knowledge to devise and use such models, but the models themselves have no knowledge, not because they're ignorant, but because they are models, that is to say, tools. They don't navigate or calculate, nor do they have destinations to reach or debts to pay. We human beings use them for these knowledge purposes. LLMs have more in common with the map or abacus than with the people who design and use them as tools. It is the tool creator and user, not the tool, who has knowledge. Another similarity between tools like maps and deep learning systems, deep learning AI systems, is that they tend to be inherently biased. For example, facial image detection systems have tended to be more accurate on images of white male faces than on images of female or non-white faces. They have classified Asian faces as blinking and missed faces with dark skin, or in one notorious case, tagged a selfie of two African Americans as gorillas. Last month, the Washington Post asked 3 AI image generating tools to show a beautiful woman, and all 3 tools generated thin women with light skin tones. The tools wouldn't produce images of full-size women or an average body type unless the offensive word fat was used as a prompt, and even then, many of the images were of women with impossibly small waists. Many other biases could be detected in the responses to the prompts. Besides sorting input into biased and loaded categories, such as racial, gender, and body stereotypes, deep learning systems will also find and learn statistical associations that are irrelevant to the task at hand if they exist in the training data. In the human context, this is a failure of relevance realization. I've been arguing that the blind spot of AI is experience and the understanding of meaning, particularly relevance realization. Blind spot thinking about AI covertly replaces genuine embodied intelligence with computation, treats abstract computational models as if they were real agents, and regards intuition as a computational epiphenomenon. This misguided perspective suffers from a deep amnesia of experience by forgetting that human experience and biases lie deeply sedimented in AI models. Cognitive science is an ambiguous field. It can pursue a path that reinforces the scientific blind spot, or it can follow a path that reveals and helps us move beyond the blind spot. Let me finish my presentation by taking a look at these 2 paths. According to the enactive approach in cognitive science, cognition is not the representation of an independent outside world by an independent inside mind, but instead is the enactment or bringing forth of a world of relevance. Organisms physically make themselves, set their own goals, realize relevance, and live in large, ambiguous worlds of ill-posed problems that are impossible to pre-state. AI systems have none of these features. They are tools, not cognitive agents. Worries about AI agency and sentience are therefore exaggerated fantasies and a distraction from the really important issues, which concern the safe and beneficial development and use of algorithmic tools, given their current dangers and biases, and the massive resource extraction and energy consumption on which AI depends. An enactive perspective can help us to appreciate that to be a cognitive agent is to make sense out of an immensely intricate, statistically non-stationary and manifold world, rather than to represent a clear-cut, stationary, and pre-given world. For enactive cognitive science, the living body is the critical node of the mind-world relation, and the body's key attribute is being self-producing. The living body, through the mutual enabling of its functional parts, makes itself distinct from its immediate surroundings and thereby fashions its environment into a world of relevance. Cognition is embodied sense-making. From this perspective, research on unsupervised neural networks, in which the system has to generate its own categories out of input data with no prior examples, can be useful for modeling the brain's ability to generate perceptual meaning in a dynamic, non-stationary environment. This kind of research opens a window onto an alternative view of the mind-world relation. The world world does not consist of ready-made, clear-cut states, objects, properties, and events. Instead, it consists of richly differentiated and interwoven processes and relations, which we parse according to our perceptual sensitivities and practical and theoretical projects. I am coming close to the end. Relevance realization emerges out of a background of enactive intuition and preconceptual sense-making, supported by our culturally configured and socially and historically situated bodies. Many of you will have noticed here a strong resonance with certain strands of Buddhist philosophy. Indeed, Mahayana Buddhist philosophy, Madhyamaka and Yogacara, played an important formative role in the original formulation of the enactive approach to cognition in our book, The Embodied Mind, Cognitive Science and Human Experience, which I wrote with the neuroscientist Francisco Varela and psychologist Eleanor Roche. We used Buddhist philosophers to present a conception of minds and worlds as interdependently constructing each other at myriad entangled scales and levels with no absolute ground or foundation. This hybrid perspective, combining Buddhist philosophy and cognitive science, can help to uncover the scientific blind spot by calling attention to how our concepts, classifications, and categories are not ready-made structures mirroring or found in a pre-given world apart from our experience. Instead, they are enacted. They are brought forth by our modes of perception and action and by our social practices. Tracing how this happens via the brain and the rest of the body is a central task of enactive cognitive science. So enactive cognitive science offers scientific ways to help us move beyond the computational blind spot. When we turn away from the enactive perspective, however, as typically happens in AI, we fall back into the computational blind spot and confuse the map with the territory, the tool with the agent, and the model with the world. For example, we slide into thinking that the data sets used to train AI systems reflect the world as it really is, all by itself, at a preconceptual level, and that the AI system is learning how to categorize and recognize features of that world. We forget that the data sets and the training of the system already incorporate human modes of conceptualization, along with their biases, and depend on a massive human infrastructure of knowledge production. Finally, we forget that AI systems do not know anything about the world as such. Instead, they detect statistical correlations in the input we give them with no understanding of what lies behind those correlations. The stakes are high. The dangers of the computational blind spot are that we will increasingly rely on computational systems that lack relevance realization, and that captivated by their information processing power, we will increasingly view ourselves in their terms. We should instead learn to use AI wisely as a tool for the tasks for which it is suitable, while strengthening our commitment to social justice and care for the world. This requires recovering enactive intuition and recognizing and freeing ourselves from the computational blind spot. Buddhist philosophy, with its many centuries of attention to how minds, bodies, and worlds interdependently originate and construct each other, can help with this task. Thank you.